They came as hopeful travelers and became a warning whispered by firesides for generations. The snow did not fall so much as arrive, a slow, merciless verdict that crusted over the wagons and the names painted on their sides. For days the wind carried the metallic scent of cold, the dry rasp of cloth against wood, the deeper, giddy staccato of a bell that no one had heart enough to ring. Hunger is an animal that speaks without words. It teaches hands to count bones and eyes to measure the distance between dawn and death. In the end, there were choices made in the dim between frost and fever, promises kept, promises broken, and an appetite so fierce that social bonds snapped like thin rope. This is not an inventory of horrors laid out for macabre curiosity. This is the attempt to listen, as close as we can, to what suffering sounds like in the wilderness. The brittle cough in the night, the soft conversation of those who think themselves dying, the economy of warmth and shame when the body is currency. If the story that follows unsettles you, if it makes you look twice at the food on your table or the shape of a human face, then the telling has done its job. If you want more of these long, unflinching stories told with the cadence of a slow-burning film, like and subscribe and stand with me in that cold, dark moment when history demands we look. Hunger as religion, the early thaws and first mornings. In this video, it will place us in the immediate, bone-by-bone world of winter's onset. The creaking of wagon axles slowing under snow's impossible weight. The first thin meals. The gathering hush when the last deer tracks retreat into white. We will live close to the small domestic rituals that comforted them, boiling leather to make broth, the counting of rations by the ember, the ritual of who took the last blanket, and we will watch those rituals harden into blunt instruments of survival. Sensory detail will be relentless, the coppery tang of blood in boiling soup, the smell of hair smoked by the campfire, the incessant whine of wind like a disappointed animal. But this is also the chapter of relationships stripped to their marrow. Husbands bargaining with one another for a corner of the wagon, mothers whispering into the ears of children so they might not wake in cold, neighbors becoming judges. The tone will be confessional and intimate. The narration will move slowly from day to day, naming the small mercies and small cruelties that accumulate until they are indistinguishable. We will not flinch from the early deaths, fever, frostbite, the sudden silence of a once talkative man, because those losses are the first stones thrown into the lake, the ripples that change who each survivor becomes. Here the reader will begin to understand hunger not as a condition, but as a belief system, arbitrary and absolute, that remakes language and law around the firelight. The private economies of survival, bargains, blame, and the body as ledger. As provisions thin and tempers fray, social etiquette gives way to transaction. We will witness how people begin to keep secret accounts of what they have consumed, what they have promised, what they thought they would one day own. The narrative will examine the private economies that grow in a trapped camp. Food becomes capital, warmth a commodity, favors a debt recorded in the memory rather than on paper. There will be accusations whispered beneath quilts, confessions carved into the margins of diaries, the nervous calculus of who will be left with which child if they must choose. Sensory language will remain vivid. A soup spoon will be described as a measuring rod of fidelity, the scrape of a spoon against a tin plate as the tiny recurring sound of moral reckoning. This chapter will also dwell on shame, how shame is negotiated, hidden, and eventually weaponized. It will not reduce people to monsters. It will show how ordinary calculations, under unimaginable stress, can become acts of extraordinary cruelty or trembling mercy. The reader will feel the claustrophobia of a community that can no longer afford the luxury of certainty about another person's intentions. The feast and the names we dare not speak. A colder, more terrible chamber of the story. Here we will confront the decisions that altered lives forever. The feasts that were not celebratory, but contractual. The bitter, private ceremonies of survival, in which flesh and memory each took their share. The narration will move with careful respect through the recorded testimonies and through the imaginative reconstruction of conversations no one left to tell. We will linger on the small, grotesque practicalities, how meat was cut and boiled, how communities came to terms with what they had done, and on the human faces in that accounting. The mothers who made the choice to feed their children, the men who kept their heads while the world around them unraveled, the quiet ones who could not bear what they had witnessed. Sensory detail will be sharper here. The smell of frozen flesh under an open sky, the way knives looked when they had been used on more than game, the taste of broth that carried both comfort and an unbearable cost. Yet the chapter will also ask the reader to consider intent and desperation. When laws cease to govern, when ethics are ruled by need, what inheres in a decision to live? This chapter will be the loudest in moral question, and it will not offer tidy answers. Outside the snow line, rumor, return, and the mechanics of memory. From the immediate hell of the camp, we will widen our gaze. Survivors who escaped walked into a world that could neither absorb their reports nor spare them from judgment. This chapter will trace how the story moved outward, how witnesses became narrators, how newspapers and town gossip turned survival into sensationalism, how legal inquiries and rescue parties translated human grief into records in courtrooms. We will explore the interplay between public fascination and private anguish, and how a community's need to define villains and saints simplified the tangled reality. The writing will track the emergence of myth, the ways details were exaggerated or erased to make a readable tale, how those choices reflected the fears and appetites of a nation in the throes of expansion. Sensory details will change here, from tactile snow to the dry scratch of ink on paper, the clink of coins in a courtroom, the theater-like hum of a town hearing. This chapter will also interrogate the mechanics of blame, how some names were sanctified, how others were buried in rumor, and how the ledger of history began to balance itself with omissive strokes. Frozen promises, legacy, law, and the dark mirror of progress. We will ask how this small, frozen calamity became a mirror for America's appetite for land and destiny, and how the myths born from it influenced law, frontier ethics, and the cultural imagination. The narrative will examine the long aftermath, the descendants who lived with a family history stained by rumor, the writers and storytellers who turned the events into cautionary tales, and the slow, uncomfortable modern attempts to reconcile compassion with judgment. The tone here will be elegiac and reflective, not merely summative. It will consider mortality, power, and what we owe to the dead whose last acts were not heroic by the pageant of history, but profoundly human. We will close with a meditation on the nature of survival itself, whether the willing to live can be disentangled from the unwilling, whether public memory honors or damns, whether the frozen promises made at the edge of civilization were ever meant to be kept. They left us with questions that do not settle, echoes that do not thaw. Who is owed forgiveness when survival was the ledger? Who is to be named monster and who only frightened human? The story of the Donner Party does not end with a date or a court record. It lives in the small, unbearable details. The last spoon scraped against a tin plate, the hush after a name was spoken and no answer came, the metallic breath of cold that seemed to measure time itself. If history can be a mirror, this is one that shows us our most private economies of need. How love can become transaction, how shame can be both shield and sentence, how promises made under snow are fragile as the skin of thin ice. Remember them not as spectacles for our horror, but as people who loved, quarreled, and feared in ways we recognize too late. To sit with that discomfort is not to sensationalize, but to reckon, to learn, not to gloat. If this slow, careful telling moved you, if it loosened a small place in your chest where empathy and judgment meet, like, subscribe, and share so these cold human stories are held rather than forgotten.